Alun Gaffey first made his name with psychedelic pop geniuses Racehorses, performing with such names as Eris Childs, Susie and the Banshees, Friendly Fires, and even, bizarrely, Scouting for Girls. But since leaving, Gaffey's really lent into the R&B, soul and funk he grew up with in the family home, as well as the turntablism and hip-hop he listened to in his teenage years. For his third solo album, he's recording in English for the first time as GAFF. As he prepares to release his new album, Escapism, I've come along to Music Box Studios to find out more. Okay, let's start differently. Shows how much I've thought about this interview. Obviously, Racehorses did sing in English. You've chosen to make the shift to English this time. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just thought it would be a change. I thought, I take a certain amount of pride in music. I think it's good, and even though I, primarily make it for myself, I thought, I'd make something that maybe to give people a chance to appreciate it further afield, maybe, and being in a language that more people can understand, maybe makes it a bit more accessible. And I wanted to separate it as well. So, when you've got these albums that bilingual and have a bit of a mix, I thought let's just keep it separate
and
coherent.
Yeah, completely. And two questions lead on from that. Obviously, now, probably even more than even your last album, streaming will undoubtedly be the main way people will reach it. That Welsh language element, it feels like streaming has helped minority languages to really reach out now. So are you kind of hoping that maybe people will open up to those first two albums, which have a similar sound?
Hopefully. It might be hampered slightly by the fact that I've chosen to rebrand and rebadge, and I've gone under a different moniker for this project. But it's a world, that I'm sort of a bit alien to, if I'm honest. Spotify playlists, blogs, those are the things that the industry runs on now. It's a far cry from, straight up CD sales and, like it used to be. It's a completely different business model. But, it's, it's exciting still. It's just, it wouldn't stop me making music really anyway, but,
Yeah, okay, so that leads on naturally to the music. So I've been listening to the album, and obviously you and I both have really shared interests. The Racehorses is well known for that psychedelic pop, but this really leans into your kind of childhood influences and those first things that you grab on around, electronica, the influences on things like hip-hop, which, we both love, but also those jazz, soul. I could hear things like the Isley Brothers and, those really woozy guitars that you heard in the 70s. It feels like you've really leaned into that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that comes to me naturally, really. Like, I grew up with stuff like Wilson Pickett, James Brown, Otis Redding, Aretha Franklin, all that kind of thing in the car constantly. So that's my kind of that's my musical beginning really. And later on as a teenager, I was big into hip hop and turntablism, and then you sort of kind of start finding out about who those artists sampled, and then you go into a whole world of obscure kind of records from the 70s and everything. And I used to go to raves and drum and bass nights and all that kind of thing. And that's yeah, that's probably truer to my identity as a person than maybe some of my, previous the bands I've been in, as much as I love all that music as well.
There are a few obvious samples, especially in some of the later songs. I say samples, well, as in where you've recorded something and sampled it, whether that's the sound, atmosphere or whatever. But actually some of those guitars that are on there, the strings, that kind of thing, almost sound like they could be sampled off a classic kind of Stax or, a track along those lines. That, I presume, is just part of it, as in that's your influence, basically, yeah?
Yeah, and, if some of them sound like that, we do, we do a lot of experimentation in the studio, so we've got like... for example, I put some stuff through an Akai sampler and then play it back and then record that or play that as an instrument, and it gives things a certain kind of dusty quality, bordering on lo-fi. The strings were all recorded live, but multi-tracked and stacked. And yeah, I suppose naturally. There's a lot of kind of musical nods to maybe trip hop and all that kind of thing there, and that kind of dustiness, scratchiness kind of thing.
And it's interesting that you seem to hear about this more and more. So there are whole record labels where they will produce an album's worth of soul music, then sample and cut it up for hip hop albums or more neo soul albums. Streets created their own samples for everything, and that's something you really enjoy because you're almost creating your own kind of samples to play off and everything then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because you've got time to experiment with sound in the studio, and you could play something straight, but then you could process it somehow or do all manner of different things to it before finding that kind of that sort of unique sound, really. And
how, so that leads naturally on, I suppose, to talking about recording. You mentioned we there, but obviously you play, or at least try to play, most if not all of the instruments. So, tell me just about how much you do yourself, how much of that was a choice, and how much of that is because of lockdown and so how much do you do yourself?
Yeah, so basically I've got a great working relationship with Frank Norton, the engineer, who's got a studio in Grangetown called Two Drug Studio. We go back a few years now, and I tend to I'll go in. I do almost everything myself, unless there's something that's a bit difficult to play. Maybe Frank will step in, or I'll often draft in people to play strings or brass instruments or things like that when I've got a particular sound in mind. I'll play drums, but if I want decent drumming, then I'll get a decent drummer in as well. But yeah, most of it is what you hear is two guys in a studio experimenting. Yeah, so Frank as an engineer sort of helps to interpret the musical ideas I have, and then he's got that ability to kind of make it a reality, through his experience and everything.
And it's got the album's got a really full sound. It feels colourful. The whole recording process then, same as with Racehorses, where you worked with, Eris Childs, with David Wrench, these really well-known, artists. They contributed a lot. It's not just you then. The person recording is also part of that process, basically.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're a big influence, a huge influence. So, and I think you talked about Racehorses. So that process was, we as a band would come in to the studio with a song that was fully formed almost and rehearsed, at least the rhythm section part of it, and record by and large live, and then obviously overdub and stuff like that. And people like Dave and Eros, I remember distinctly, would drill down getting the rhythm section, getting the right take for the rhythm section, even if it meant, doing 30 or 40 takes. My process with Frank is completely different. I'll go into the studio most of the time without a song fully formed. I'll have an idea, a vague idea, maybe a bass line or a riff or a sample or a certain sound that I want to use. Maybe some lyrics scribbled onto a notepad, and then it's kind of down to the gods really then. It kind of just, on a good day, it comes together really naturally and happens, and we kind of arrange on the fly, and that's the kind of way I enjoy working really.
I've got to broach, this is a natural way to broach this subject, but is that partly a symptom of your age and means, i.e. the time you've got? In the past, you and the rest of the band would be performing together, would be practicing together, and then you'd go into a studio and record. The studio is where you do everything now, presumably. Is that partly because of what you have at your disposal and how you're growing up and need to look after the kids?
Yeah. Well, yeah, partly, but I think no. I think when I was in the band, we were a band, and we were, for all intents and purposes, doing that full time. Whereas this is just the way I like to work with Frank, and it's kind of a completely different process, something that we'd never have done back then. Sorry, I had an answer.
Do you think that the technology partly enables you too, but also when I hear the process of what happens with hip hop, with people working in the studio around these more this more abstract music, I suppose, for want of a better way of putting it, it does feel like you've really leaned into that process almost, that you're creating sounds and then you'll stitch it together afterwards in a funny sort of way. Yeah,
so I think the way I operate is more akin to like a hip hop producer or like a bedroom producer or something like that, rather than a traditional band with fully formed songs going into the studio and putting it down. It's more like I treat it as it's like almost like I go into the studio to have fun, and it's like a big canvas, and I can do whatever the hell I want, and I chuck everything at it, and I'm a bit of a maximalist in that sense, and I really want to kind of try and do something where I've got maybe a limited set of instruments and something that's sparse and has a lot of space, but any time I try that I always fail, because it's like, I could put this on it and I could put this on it.
You could do with a banging doink.
Yeah. Or four of them stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I heard any cowbells, but it felt like everything else was there.
Yeah, cowbells on this. Yeah, I've got everything on it. I've got sleigh bells on it. I've got
But when we keep talking about hip hop and about kind of funk and those that kind of what you're saying, that almost cut up sort of process, yet the end results are very accessible and pop. It's quite interesting that despite all of those hard influences, that kind of thing, there's something that you've got like a when it comes to the music, you've got quite a soft heart there, and they feel very lush and nice, despite it being a sort of cut-up technique. you know, you clearly still, same as Racehorses, you clearly have a soft heart there.
Yeah, and like a pop sensibility, I suppose. Like, you know, you can't beat a 3.5 minute pop song with a simple, you know, verse, chorus, middle eight, double chorus structure. But there are, you know, some other tracks on the album where they're a bit more sort of maybe untraditional in that sense. But yeah, that kind of that cut up stuff and the sort of kind of drum beats and samples, they form the backbone, really. That kind of syncopation, that funky stuff, and then it's a case of arranging it and then putting the lush stuff on top. Yeah,
it does feel like you can't help yourself. That I remember Griff Rhys talking about how he really likes abstract hard stuff, etc., and yet at the heart of it, he likes pulling on the heartstrings, or, you know, he loves the really, don't want to say twee, but that kind of thing that you can't help but you know, you find the heart in there. It feels like these songs really have heart.
All right, yeah. I mean, and I think it depends what we're talking about, really, in terms of, because I thought we're talking about bringing it back to being like a pop song at the end of the day, yeah. And like, I listen to, you know, your sort of Aphex Twin type stuff. I was listening to something called Pie Corner Audio the other day, and it's just like these really long, drawn out kind of analog synth patterns and stuff like that. And I can listen to that all day, but I also love, you know, 80s Madonna, Hall and Oates, Aha, Prince, you know, you name it. I love all that stuff, you know, and I think, that kind of thing kind of touches people more, I think.
And there is a real 80s pop feel about it as well, almost like a fuller version of it, but it does feel like you've got that melody hidden away in there and stuff.
Yeah, and certain things that, you know, it's funny because what the process is for me is, in trying to be something else, in trying to sound something, I want those drums to sound, you know, like gated, like, you know, like a certain record or whatever, and then you try and recreate something that's inspired you and that you've heard, and in doing so, you don't recreate it like for like. It becomes something of your own, and that's the exciting thing about recording, I think, because it never sounds like the idea you've got in your head, but it's something else, it's something new and better, you know.
All throughout this, the one thing we haven't discussed here is the lyrics and I suppose the period we're talking about. Let's start with the process and what it was like, and tell me about. So basically, this coincides with lockdown, and your previous album had literally come out, I think, just as lockdown had hit, and you had a band ready and everything. Tell me about that, kind of what that was like, because this album feels like there's frustration in there.
Yeah.
So tell me what that period was like for you.
Absolutely. So that album came out, I think, in April of 2020. So you know, prior to the lockdown and everything, I had a new band that I'd put together to play these songs. I had some bookings to play gigs and festivals over the summer, and the world changed, you know, and you know, I put the album out, and it was quite an interesting time in terms of people were doing creative things from their bedrooms, creating content. So I got to, you know, play around and try and make the best of a bad situation and promote that album, doing all that kind of stuff. But after a while, it was like, you know, lockdown and the sort of the following sort of months, you know, there came a time where it was like, you know, I want to go back to the studio now. and it was one of my kind of, before even going to like a restaurant or, you know, any of the sort of events that they, you know, limited style events that people would put on, that was my kind of priority. And so, you know, I got in touch with Frank and we did stuff like lateral flow tests and isolated for a certain number of days before, you know, going in. And that was the beginning of this album, you know, the makings of this album. And, you know, as time went on, you know, you relaxed and everything. But, yeah, there is a lot of frustration on it. There's a lot of frustration from, yeah, just, you know...
You've always told me whenever we've spoken about it that the lyrics kind of always come last. That, you know, the music drives you, and then you always have that, how do the lyrics fit with this? But I think, you know, the lyrics are really strong. You know, these are sort of, the music's really strong and everything, but the lyrics, they don't always, it's one of those things, happy music, kind of frustrated lyrics, sad, angry. I mean, you go through, to me it feels like, you know, knowing you away from the band, it feels like you're really, really vulnerable in here, in these songs. Whenever we've spoken beforehand, and it feels a bit like, often it feels like as we're talking, you feel almost embarrassed about opening yourself up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. So on your 2 points there, I think, yeah, definitely sort of quite often the lyrics are at odds with maybe how upbeat and you know, so energetic a lot of the music is. But in terms of yeah, the writing, I mean, I wish I could paint a picture like, you know, Donald Fagen does, you know, writes these like really out there stories about characters and stuff like that, or Bob Dylan or something like that. But I always revert to that same old bloody self-pitying, you know, woe is me kind of themes. It's just, yeah, it's just what I do, really.
But the you know, you talked a bit about the desire to get back into the studio, and this process has taken 4 years. Now, obviously, albums take a long time.
Yeah.
But it feels a bit like you're in this album. It does feel like you're living your heart on your sleeve. A lot of those songs you talk about, you know, you don't go personal. You don't go into personal details, but it does feel like that frustration is there. So when you're talking, you know, in the first couple of songs, you know, first single, you are there talking about making music and what you get from it. You know, you talked there about going to the studio ahead of going to a restaurant. It feels like this is something that you needed, and this period must have been difficult in that sense.
Yeah, sure, and you know, it's like, yeah, it took so long because, you know, you got to get things in the calendar, you got to juggle it with all your other commitments, and, you know, I'm sure I could have made it in much less time than 4 years, but it's just, you know, it's one of them things. Well, I actually mastered it in September of last year, so and it's taken until now to come out. But yeah, those kind of it's like it may sound cliche, but it's like you go in and it's like a process of maybe therapy or catharsis or something like that, where you just kind of, you know, inject that frustration into something.
Yeah, it really felt that. I mean, you know, your second single, you know, although it just sounds like it's a road trip type thing, there is that frustration and longing. There are times in the album where it feels like you're almost telling yourself little mottos. You will get through this. You know, you talk about that longing. So it really, you know, once you know the context of the lockdown, you know, there clearly was, you know, you were living through the music to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one, yeah, Chef Showen, even though I sort of name check a city in northern Morocco. It's more sort of more symbolic of wanderlust, you know, wanting to see the world. There's an element of last chance tourism there as well, because, you know, the world is crumbling and you kind of want to see it. I was reading about these glaciers somewhere where there's a big boom in sort of tourism, where they go and see these glaciers, but, you know, they're sort of fast melting, you know, and all of the tourism surrounding it is detrimental to the place as well. But I'm going off on a tangent here. I think it was just, well, escapism, it's in the title of the album, so through escapism, like literal escape, like wanting to travel, or escapism through the music. So Putting It Down, the opener, is one of the rare sort of joyous ones on the album. It's that sort of exhilaration of, you know, going to the studio and, you know, being sort of truly free, you know, in a creative sense. And I think, escape is, I think that's probably a common thread. Anyone who listens to or indeed makes music, I think it's all about escapism, probably.
Yeah, and carrying on with Chef Joanne, there is, you know, and it's kind of you talked there about the end of the world. There feels like there's quite a lot of, you know, you are releasing quite a lot of frustration there and fears, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, it's, you know, I'm just trying to think what else. Yeah, because, you know,
I know I sound like your therapist.
Yeah, that's fine. It's free therapy,
but it does feel like you're talking about visiting. I can't remember what the term was. New soils you have unfamiliar soil, but it's clearly at that point when you're recording that and you're thinking about those lyrics, that was the furthest away. You know, we didn't know how long this was going to last.
No.
You know,
no.
It must have been, you know, we're talking about a physical escape and a psychological escape, really.
Absolutely. And I'm trying to remember if that was, you know, when we were in the sort of depth of COVID or the period after. But it was, well, it's there in the lyrics really. In the chorus, it says something like, I've got to quench this wanderlust before the world is set on fire. There's that kind of, it feels like time's running out. There's, you know, you doom scroll, don't you? And it just feels like some end days almost, and it was almost like a selfish, you know, like, I want to see, you know, I want to see and experience things that maybe I didn't when I was in my 20s, because I was touring in a band and playing in places like Coventry and Lancaster and Edinburgh, rather than, you know, going to these amazing places like, I actually went to Morocco this time last year, which was great, and did a bit of an epic trip.
And did you see Chef Joanne?
Yeah, I went there. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Oh, it was fantastic. It did live up.
Was, yeah.
So was Chef Joanne a specific place you wanted to go, or was it a random place you picked on the map that was the, you know, did it represent everywhere else?
Exactly. So it was a specific place that I wanted to go. So last year, I went with a couple of friends. I flew to Marrakesh, and then we did this epic sort of going across the country in a Toyota Land Cruiser, going further and further closer to the Sahara Desert. Spent a couple of nights in the Sahara, in the sand dunes under the stars, near the border with Algeria, and headed up north, Fez, Chefchaouen, Tangier, and then crossed the ferry to Spain, and then drank in Malaga for a couple of nights before coming back home to my family. So I did want to go to that specific place, but you're bang right in that it was, you know, representative of everything, everywhere else, and experience, you know, and soul-satisfying experience, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And I've got to ask you about another song while we're talking about lyrics. You know, one of the standout songs for me is a kind of former recovering Moax obsessive and trip-hop and everything was Black Hole. But, you know, and it just really rang true to me, just in terms of, you know, you mentioned losing a hero, and it felt like we were hearing, you know, these legends of jazz, hip-hop, all this music. We were losing every week, it felt like, every other day almost, when you tally up the people who were lost in that year of lockdown. I mean, you know, it's huge. Tell me a little bit just about, you know, what that meant to you.
Yeah, it was that feeling, you know. It was like, yeah, there were people going like dominoes, and very, it's a really negative way of looking at it, but very little to replace that, you know. I think it's almost lamenting how good culture used to be as well. So you've got these people who have made these really sort of valuable contributions to music and the arts, for both the superstar world and closer to home as well during that period. Larger than life characters, real standout people, and they die, and so it was like, you know, they leave, like, you know, a body of work and memories and everything, but maybe it was like a comment on, because it says, but not a legacy, because I don't feel that there's, you know, maybe it's a cynical, you know, old man yelling at clouds kind of thing, but it doesn't feel like there's, you know, that thing there to replace them. But kind of cynical.
For me, it felt like whether those were our superstar heroes who we'd never meet, we might see them in a concert, but we might never meet them, or whether it was people who influenced us when we were young people, or people we knew in our towns and stuff. And, you know, you're the same as me, living in South Wales, but from North Wales. It felt like we couldn't mourn these people in the way we should. You know, the best you could hope for was that there would be a funeral virtually, or you would some DJ would play a tribute to them, or you'd be able to stand on the side of a street while the hearse went past. It felt, you know, you're talking about a legacy. Some of that legacy is remembering them there and then as well.
I was thinking, talking about like a cultural legacy, like, you know, people carrying the torch, but also I think the older you get, the more sort of aware of mortality you are, and the more, even though a lot of these people we talk about died young, I think death becomes sort of more on the radar as well as you get older, and I think all that's in there in that song, you know.
We got dark quite suddenly there. But you know, but again, we come back to, you mentioned the opening track there, that, you know, that just is the perfect opener for the album, because it just sets out, this is about music, this is about, you know, you set out the process of laying down the tracks and stuff. I mean, tell me just about, I mean, did you deliberately choose that as the you know, did you record them in sequence, did you track list, and how important was it to open with something like that, which is just so bouncy, for want of a better way of putting it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't record them in sequence at all. In fact, I don't think about sequencing when I'm recording them, but when I recorded that particular one, it was instantly obvious to me that it's the opener. You know, it was like that kind of that's setting you up. You know, it's like a. Well, I think, you know, it's a banger. You know, so you know, it's a good start. It's always good to start with a banger, isn't it? And yeah, absolutely laying down what it is, what I'm doing. You know.
Yeah, it just feels like a brilliant opener, and there are 2 or 3 tracks that you could have closed with, just because you have that same as some of the Racehorses songs. You seem to build at the end, strings coming in. There are several tracks that you could have closed with and stuff. How did you create that kind of, you talked about needing to get musicians in. Tell me about at what point you start calling for help in terms of, strings in particular spring to mind.
Yeah, so sometimes it's like it comes to you during the process, do you know what? We need saxophone here now, absolutely. I think I know a guy, and then put some calls round and I get someone in. Other times, there's a couple of the tracks on the album, Indigo, and there's another one as well, where I knew that I wanted double bass part of it, So yeah, you kind of draft them in, when you get the idea really. So and I've got a guy. I don't know if you know Thomas Williams, the jazz trumpeter. So he played on my last album, but he's also the guy I text whenever I need, good jazz musicians. So I go, do you know any good sax players? And he gives me 3 numbers, in Cardiff. Do you know any good, double bassists? Yeah, because it gives me 3 numbers, and yeah.
And all of those were recorded after Lockdown eased. They were added on top. Like, you were never tempted to be recording stuff over Zoom or Teams?
No, I mean, I've got... I had a bit of a setup back home. I had an interface and a decent condenser mic, and I had the means to do it, but I'm very impatient whenever things go technically wrong. Not like I'm a Luddite or anything, but if something goes wrong with the software or something, it just kind of kills the vibe. It instantly kills the creative urge really, and you just go, sod this and go and do something else. But then but I had a bit of a setup in the room in the back of my house, which was like an office space with a desk and everything, but I've since had to change that into a bedroom for my son, who was born 3 years ago. So I don't have the means to record, but even when I did, I kind of lost patience with it really. So I have to go to a studio and have an engineer there,
I think we've got everything around the album. Is there anything else I should have asked you?
Well, only it's coming out. It's out on the 6th of December on Côsh Records, Owain Gwyneth's label, and I put a band together to play the songs live.
Yeah. So okay, let me talk about that. So, all the best kind of funk and soul bands and all these bands, they all sound different on record to how they sound live. And you've recorded everything not everything, but you've recorded most things yourself. There's also the fact you're sampling things and then playing them back through. How are you going to turn that? Is the live experience going to be a completely different sound? Are you going to try and replicate? How do you approach all of that, especially with other musicians, presumably?
Yeah, so obviously you've got to try and sort of approximate or arrange a live version of the song with the sort of with your limitations of having 5 people in a room. So I just sort of don't get hung up on trying to recreate everything like for like, recreate the sounds. They don't have to be the same instruments or anything like that. It becomes fun then, and something different. But I have found a way of sort of bringing elements of the album's kind of colour into the live setting. So I've got an Akai 8-pad sampler, and you can load loads of samples into it and save them into different banks. So all little kind of synth sounds and spoken word samples and all sort of other different stuff I've got on there. I've got, you know, on pads, so you can just like trigger live. So that brings, you know, elements of the album into it. But yeah, I'm not hung up on, you know, trying to get it sounding like it does in the studio. I couldn't, you physically couldn't anyway with, you know, 5 guys in the room, really.
And have you, did you ever, in the end, tour the last album?
No. No, the closest I came to playing songs from that album live was I played an acoustic set. I don't know if you remember the virtual Tavwheel events. So they got like a filming company to film some stuff in the castle in Cardiff, and it was like a live streaming thing. So I did a couple of tracks off that album, but like with samples and an acoustic guitar. Yeah, it was a bit weird, but you know, it was fun.
So are you going to do those songs as well?
Might do a couple, yeah. Might do a couple of the more energetic ones.
I was going to, so do you think you've become a better musician? Do you think you've moved on from those songs?
I mean, I don't think I'm a good musician anyway, but you know.
Okay. Do you think do you think GAFF is better than Alun Gaffey?
I mean, you know, there's progression. There's a certain progression there in the music. I think. I'm not even convinced that, you know, rebranding it was a good idea. It's a bit late now. You know, it's not like I've reinvented. You know, it's not like I've started crooning or you know, become the Thin White Duke or anything. But yeah, and it's led to a whole manner of problems with. There's like a Belgian artist called GAFF, and at the moment it's on Apple Music. My tracks are on his profile, which is a pain in the ass. Because mine's in capital letters, but they haven't put it on with capital letters on Apple Music, so that's.
you it's so funny, considering how much technology you work with, you sound like a grumpy old man.
Yeah, that's what I am. That's what I am.
I've got to ask you one question which always obsesses me about musicians who have full-time jobs and families. How the heck, like you're talking about rehearsing, you were talking about escaping down the studio. How the hell, you know, especially during the lockdown, you know, I know you weren't homeschooling, but, you know, you talk about escape and stuff. This is so important to you then, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you, you know, forget about lockdown, that it ever happened, it's difficult, isn't it? If, you know, you've got life and its commitments. So, yeah, it's a case of putting things in the calendar, you know, way in advance and, you know, helping each other out and kind of, you know, just kind of organising your life, really. Because, yeah, it is important to me. And I could easily not do it, you know, and just fall into a sort of routine or something. And it's important to me, even if it doesn't reach anyone. It's an important aspect of my identity, which I hope to continue, you know, as long as I, you know, as long as I'm excited by it. I've got about 5 songs in the making for the next album. So yeah, it just never stops, really.
And are they gonna be instrumental, 20-minute long, Aphex Twin style wig outs?
No, no, they're going to be 3.5-minute pop songs, with you know, influenced by a whole manner of things. Yeah, I've got one on this new one now, which is going ahead a bit. That's it's very influenced by sort of desert music. So when I was in Morocco, I saw the sort of Gnawa people playing like traditional kind of sort of music. They've got instruments. One's called a synth, which is like a bassy type plucked instrument. They've got crackeb, which are these kind of iron castanets, and they go into like grooves with those. I've got myself a pair of those, and it's kind of influenced by that. There's another track there that's influenced by something I thought I heard in a swimming pool. I was in a swimming pool, and it was crazy, like kids everywhere, slides and like music on these speakers, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. But my brain's interpretation of what I heard inspired me to put something down in the studio, because I heard a certain kind of energy to this track, which is probably just like a chart pop song or something. I still to this day don't know what it was, but what my brain was interpreting anyway, I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like really exciting.
So as somebody who has never recorded anything apart from a crappy remix of my brother's school band, it sounds to me like your brain is constantly thinking about it. It's part of who you are, basically.
Yeah, I mean, my phone's got, voice notes and written notes constantly. I'm just kind of thinking about it all the time, really, yeah.
So are you hard to live with if you're recording music? If you're not recording music, sorry.
You'd have to ask my wife about that, and she'd probably have some thoughts on that subject, really.
Yeah, which one's easier for her, isn't it?
Well, it's like the difference between my mood and state of mind in the days following when I'm booked to go into the studio, and when I come back, it's like this weight has gone.
You were talking there just about one more question, which is just about you were talking there about coming across all these amazing instruments and music and everything, and we do come back to that whole everything is available on Spotify. You can access more music than ever before. Welsh music has never had such a large audience. You're hearing about millions of plays, which was unimaginable outside the biggest names, and yet there's something that seeing things properly, or seeing things being played, or experiencing those obscure musical instruments or musical instruments from the other side of the world, there is something about that live music that you can't replicate, or influences you in ways you can't measure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're talking about sort of the world of music today, it's quite amazing, isn't it, that almost all recorded music is in your pocket now, and that's actually incredible. Like, even 10 years ago, if you said that, you'd be like, what, the hell? And yet, everyone's kind of in their own little worlds. There's no kind of shared cultural experience anymore. People aren't watching the same TV programmes at the same time. You haven't got the eyes of the nation on one particular thing, or the ears of the nation on one particular thing. Everyone's doing their own thing. You could never have like a musical movement like rave or something these days, because everyone's just like in their own worlds, and that's one of the sort of more negative sides of what you're talking about. And yes, people got access to a large audience, but it's also very difficult to cut through. And I think the whole industry runs on sort of radio pluggers and promotion and stuff like that, and getting certain blogs to highlight your music and stuff. A lot of this I've kind of come to realise recently. But I think your question was about...
But it does mean that the magical moments are even more magical. When you stumble across something, there's a random choir singing a random cover of something, or Moroccan music somewhere, it makes it even more magical, doesn't it?
Oh
That
yeah.
magic of music never goes away.
Oh, never, and it doesn't have to be new either, does it? It's like you can discover something from the 20th century or whatever, and it's new to you, isn't it? And there was a period of time where I was quite disillusioned with modern music, and I was more of an old man yelling at clouds then than I am now. But then, sort of more recently, in more recent years, I've become excited by certain newer stuff again. I love that band, Khruangbin. I went to see Amyl and the Sniffers in Bethnal Green. That was an incredible gig. I saw another Australian band, King Gizzard, who were just incredible. So like a Mono Neon, I don't know if you've heard of him, the bassist from Memphis. Like newer stuff now excites me again, so yeah.
Yeah, you've sent me lots of them on, and that's cheered up the Friday afternoon.
He's great, man. Yeah.
Right, brilliant.
Are we getting kicked out?
Yeah.
Sorry guys, I got the next band arrived.
Yeah, we'll finish it.